Hello, that is right. I am back from holiday and relaxed and refreshed and so glad I just took a nice quiet week to take some time away, not really look at what was going on in the world, and nothing really happened from what I saw. So, there's no big major announcements around the Microsoft Intelligent Data. Okay. All right, fine. I chose to go away when it was the week of Microsoft Build. So there's been a big old conference over in the US when they talk about all the big releases and all the big roadmap items, and a lot of the big things that are happening in the world of Microsoft. And it covers everything from what they're doing on the app dev side, all the developer tools, AI, data, all of that good stuff. Lots and lots of stuff in the Power Platform as well. There's a load of stuff going on. And obviously we didn't really talk about it at the time. So I'm here to talk about it today. What they normally do really, really nicely is there is the big book of news that gets pushed out. So we'll see a nice one-stop shop for all of the announcements made at during the Build event. So as always, I do kind of say, if you can, register for a Build. It was free. Go and watch the keynote from Satya. Go and watch the Microsoft Data AI Intelligence Platform things to kind of get their steer on what it is. But if you've sat there and you've watched it and you've gone, what is it? I don't get it. Then honestly, I don't blame you. So that's what we're here to talk about today. We're going to run through the things in the book of news that I'm interested in, that I thought was actually interesting and worth pulling out and having a quick chat about. We'll talk about the Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform and what that is and why it's gone GA. And we'll talk about some other major releases. There is a big old thing that was released in Power BI called Data Mart, which is probably worth touching on and talking about where that fits into the world. So that is the plan. This is your Build 2022 Book of News review, talking about things. Yeah, that's what we're doing here. As always, if it's your first time here, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know down in the comments what were the elements of Build that you're particularly excited about. Anything you've been trying, anything you've been waiting to get your hands on, and now you can, let us know. All right, let's dig into stuff. So, as always, we have the big book of news. This is something I started doing a couple of years ago, which is just so much better than when we used to have to hunt around the entirety of the conference to try and work out what was actually released. We now have this nice big collection of all the different news that was made. So great, worth digging in and having a look. I'm going to skip through. Let's get straight into the meat of it. There are some AI-based ones, but we'll probably do a little roundup of some of the AI news separately because there's quite exciting stuff happening in there. I'm going to skip straight into Azure Data. That's what I care about. And first thing that we see is the Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform is now generally available. Now, a lot of people have looked at this and said, oh, it's GA. GA means it's a tool, right? So I can do I go into Azure and spin up a new intelligent data platform? That sounds interesting. Or do I go into the Power Platform? Is it something living over there because it's Microsoft, not Azure? And this whole announcement has caused quite a lot of confusion from what I've seen. So let's go and dig into what this is. Firstly, it sounds great. Unify databases, analytics, and governance. All right. It's going to allow you to easily pivot and hit all your things and add intelligence and do stuff. Digging in down here, we go to a little bit more of a bit of detail. So Rohan Kumar, who's kind of the big dog of Azure Data, went and did a big kind of talk through in terms of how all this stuff works. And again, you could be forgiven for not really understanding what Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform is as a result of that. Because it goes in and it talks about all these things. What have we got? So that thing, I don't know, we're going to start calling it the MIDP? MIDP? That thing. And then we're talking about Synapse Link for SQL. We're talking about changes to Azure Synapse Analytics. We're talking about SQL Server 2022. Things to do with Azure Arc and kind of how we're managing SQL Server through it. We're talking about Cosmos DB, importing Microsoft 365 data, and we're talking about that thing I mentioned earlier, Data Mart in Power BI. Now, you could be forgiven for looking at that and going, well, they're all existing things that we know about, so why is this a new thing? Why is the Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform a new announcement, and how is it GA when it's made up of all these different separate pieces? And I think this picture, so if you dig further into it, if you're in here and you find that Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform, it takes you to the product landing page for this new data platform. And you kind of see this is kind of what we're talking about. Getting there. there we go. That little picture for me sums it up, which you guys can't quite see. Let's try and make it so you can see it. Oop. Oh, that's what I wanted. Okay, so this new platform is actually made of those things we see at the bottom. So SQL Server, Azure SQL, Cosmos DB, Synapse Analytics, Power BI, Purview, and Azure AI. So actually, it's not a new product. It's not a brand new thing you can spin up and you deploy. It's actually starting to change the way we talk about this distributed net of different data products. And that's a great thing, because we have for a long time talked about SQL Server as a separate thing. That's the on-prem thing that lives over there. We talked about the Azure data platform and the massive array of different things that sit inside it, whether that is a SQL database, whether that's Synapse, whether that's lakes, whether that's other things that are in that whole massive umbrella of data platforms, or whether it is Power BI and all the analytics and all that things. When actually what they're talking about here makes entire sense. That is actually a single ecosystem of operational data flowing through into analytics with an overwhelming umbrella of governance across the whole thing. So this is essentially a signal from Microsoft saying, well, actually, we're going to start talking about it as the same thing. We're going to start talking about this umbrella of all of these different products, whether it's Synapse, whether it's SQL Server itself, whether it is Power BI and its capability for doing analytics. Actually, we'll talk about that under the umbrella of the Intelligent Platform, Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform. And that's great, honestly. So from an industry point of view, we've seen from Microsoft, we've seen the SQL Server guys, Data Platform guys, Power BI guys as entirely separate teams with their own roadmaps working in very, very different ways. If we're now going to start seeing a coherent approach, saying, well, actually, because we understand these work the same way, we're going to have much tighter integration. We're going to have, if we put a new feature in there, it actually has full feature parity throughout. That kind of conversation is fantastic for anyone currently using these tools. Hopefully that kind of explains it. It's not a new thing. It's just a new umbrella. You could be caught accusing it of being a marketing exercise of saying, oh, we should rename the thing. But the symbolism and certainly the leadership of direction and saying, look, we know it's been distributed. We're now going to spearhead it all together. Synapse, Power BI, SQL Server, Purview. These are now products that actually are now closely related and talk to each other and will work in the same direction. That's what I took away from it. I don't know if that's what everyone took away from it. That's certainly what I took away from it. And everything that's in there is then talking about what's in here. Well, you got databases, the various different database tools, SQL, Cosmos DB, all those things. Analytics, you've got Synapse, you've got Power BI, you've got Azure ML, governance, you've got Microsoft Purview, no longer Azure Purview. And that's it. So we're saying we've got a new term that encapsulates all of those products that we know and love already. Hopefully I've not got that horrendously wrong. That is what I understand it to be. Don't be confused by the fact it's now GA, because it's not a new thing. All right, next. So SQL Server 2022, we've been hearing bits and pieces about. So hearing about the announcements of how it's going to go. Some of the real big kind of directional things tie into that thing that we just saw. So the fact that it's going to be Synapse Link enabled. So Synapse Link, they talk about in quite a few different places throughout some of these announcements. Synapse Link is our ability to automatically pull data from a source system into an analytical lake that we can then access. And it's all black box. So we've had it previously in Cosmos DB, did a video in the past about Cosmos DB, Synapse Link, and you can just go make this collection available for analytics. And then if you connect to it via Synapse, you can then query that Cosmos DB directly. But rather than querying a massive load of JSON documents, you're actually querying a nice column store, compressed, lake-based analytical store. So it's kind of doing that first hop of ETL for you and saying you should query the thing directly, but it's already in a state that is optimized for analytics. So this is saying the same thing. This is saying that actually what we can do is if you've got SQL Server data, you can now use Azure Synapse Link over SQL Server in SQL Server 2022 when it's out. So you actually be able to directly just register that with Synapse and then go in there and write a serverless SQL pool query that goes and queries your on-prem SQL Server in a nice analytics style. Same with Spark. You could write a Spark notebook and then just refer to your Synapse Link to that SQL Server and query the data directly, again, in a good analytical style. So really, really nice thing to see that. And that kind of signaling of intent of saying, well, actually SQL Server itself is getting more and more and more cloud enabled. So loads of interesting things we can do in there. Lots of things to do with kind of making it better for DR and cloud-based backups and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, just generally interesting stuff. I've not dug into the rest of it. I don't do a lot of traditional SQL Server these days, but certainly that as a direction is super, super interesting to me. Other sides, Cosmos DB just keeps getting bigger and better for doing app-based OLTP. Again, then enabled to query it for analytics through Synapse Link, which is very, very useful. One of the complaints has been about how some of it scales. It can get quite expensive if you've scaled it up and you need a really, really big ones, tons of RUs, all that kind of stuff. So increasing elastic scale, increasing kind of generally the throughput, what you can fit into the more scalable approaches for it, just makes it a bit more accessible, makes it more cheap, makes it more usable in various other things. So yeah, super, super interesting ways of using it. And yeah, you've now got an offline way of playing with it. So interesting stuff in Cosmos DB. Nothing crazy in terms of analytics. That's all kind of been taken care of in terms of enable Synapse Link, go and query it from Synapse. Okay, SQL DB. So some more stuff in Azure SQL database. So a few things around bindings in Azure Functions. So if you've not used Azure Functions before, you can do a thing called binding. And that means when you call the function and you pass a certain parameter, that actually instantiates a binding directly to a data store. And then the function has the context of the record that you're querying. And it means that you don't then, inside your function, have to write a bit of code, say, right, get this parameter, go and talk to the thing, get it back, now go and do a thing, and you write a load of data operations talking to Cosmos DB. It is. And you could do that previously in C#. We're actually saying we can now do that in Python and JavaScript as well. So actually, as soon as you can write a little Python function, and as soon as that code is actually executed, it has the context of the record that you're working with, and it just makes it really easy and really flexible to work with that stuff. So that's nice. I've got the ability to do bindings via different languages on top of an Azure SQL DB. Got a local development environment for Azure SQL DB, which is bad. So you can now build out local source control projects, deploy them properly, and have it working a little bit nicer. I've not had to play with that. Don't know what that's going to be like. And finally, kind of JSON constructors, making JSON a little bit more flexible and usable coming from Azure SQL DB. Again, so it can talk to APIs and things like that, which that's, again, not had too much of a dig into there, but useful if you're doing some more kind of data interchange things on top of Azure SQL DB. JSON is a very, very common language these days for how we transfer data between stuff, especially as we go more and more cloudy and more API driven. Final bit on traditional data side. You've got Ledger feature, essentially blockchain for SQL Server. If you want to be able to create an object and have that actually cryptographically locked in as a formal record, you can now do that. So honestly, don't know how often we'd ever use that in terms of analytics. If you're trying to do something as formal entries, trying to do some formal logging, all that kind of stuff, you could use it. Probably going to be other sides in terms of people building actual kind of fairly formal banking apps and various things inside an Azure SQL DB. Don't know how much I'd use it for, honestly. So, over on the Synapse side of things. So again, the big side that we heard in SQL Server, in order to have SQL Server work with Synapse Link, we have to have a thing called Synapse Link for SQL. That's one of the biggest things that we've seen announced in build for Synapse is the ability to use Synapse Link on top of a SQL database. And that's powerful, right? In terms of we talk about how we go and get a load of data, let me just switch over to a little whiteboard. If we talk about what we're currently doing in the data platform, I've got my Synapse there. I try and draw the logo. It never goes well when I draw the logo. Okay, that's not too bad. Right. If I've got sitting there as my central Synapse workspace, and I've got data held in a SQL DB and another SQL DB, I've got a big Cosmos DB web app, I've got Dataverse, but I can never draw the logo, so I'm just going to call that DV. And I'm trying to get data into some kind of super fancy Power BI report. I'm trying to do some analytics, but actually a range of different data models. Then to get all of this data in, I can build out some nice, repeatable, engineered, Lakey style ETL systems. But I need to get the data into the thing first. I nearly always have something at the start of my processes, which is going, get data, pull it into a landing area, get data, pull it into there, get data, pull it into there, get data, pull it into there, and manage the update of that, manage the changes, manage the keeping and how often I go and scrape it and how often I go and do it and Maybe someone says, well, that one needs to be every 5 minutes. Maybe that one's daily. And I've got all that complexity. And it's interesting trying to tie that stuff together. What Synapse Link is doing, now that I can do it across SQL databases, across Cosmos, across the Dataverse, I can actually register all of these different sources and just have, rather than have this whole central intermediate bit, have them presented directly straight, queryable to my Synapse workspace. And that's powerful. Oh, you don't get it. Well, I can choose another color. Fine, let's go with reds. Whoop. There we go, you can see better. And we can go and pull that in and have that managed inside our Synapse workspace. The Synapse Link, very, very important. And the more different sources that we have with Synapse Link, the more powerful it is. If Synapse Link could only pull from Cosmos and most of your data is held in SQL Server, it's not really any use to you. But if you can pull from SQL Server, from Dataverse, from Cosmos DB, that's starting to cut away quite a large swathe of the kind of data sources people have. Now, Azure SQL DB is the primary thing you'll be able to do this immediately until SQL Server 2022 comes out and you're using it. But that's still... Okay, so yeah, Synapse Link for SQL Server, really, really good. Other side of things, organizational data. So if you have Microsoft Graph, if you're using things in Microsoft 365, essentially, you can start to interact with that and drag that down and start to interact with it a bit more. So you can start to go and look at how people are actually using Microsoft 365. You can start to pull some of that data in. I've barely looked at that side of things. But again, it's talking about that same story, right? We're talking about this Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform, and we're saying, well, actually, the more connected these things in, the more we're talking about a common thing, the better. And having 365 talk a lot closer to our data platforms via linking it straight into things like Synapse just makes a lot of sense. So not dug into exactly what you can do with it, but still useful part of the story. Final one, less relevant for what we're talking about today, is there's a new tier when we're talking about MySQL. So you've got kind of Azure database for MySQL. There used to be a flexible server memory optimized tier. They've renamed it now. It's now business critical. They've increased some of the elements to it, be a little bit faster. So if you're trying to do things at scale in MySQL and you're using Azure SQL for MySQL, you can actually now do and use that. There's a quick, simple thing. Okay, final little bits and pieces on the other side of that. Microsoft Purview. Again, we saw the rename of Purview last month. So it used to be Azure Purview, and it's very much for looking at the things in Azure. And now with this kind of slightly wider look at things, we've said, well, actually, it's not just Azure. It's looking across 365, and it's looking across other data estates. It's looking across everything that is in your Purview. I'll not make that joke. And so that changed to Microsoft Purview we saw come in. And this is, again, kind of making it a little bit more functional, making it a little bit more like that central place where you can do everything that's governance related. So this Microsoft Purview data policy, SQL, is all about actually saying, if you have a SQL Server, you can now go enable who can see which bits of data inside that SQL Server directly from inside Purview. So allowing you to have a bit more control about that. Essentially, you say, Purview can control access for me. And then in Purview, you can assign those roles. You can have essentially allow business users to tag things as different sensitivities and manage things that way, allowing you to then essentially democratize data governance and security. Not necessarily democratize, lower the technical barrier. So you'd have to write a bit of SQL to grant access to something. You can allow your business users to set and change those rules if they want. It tends to be the data owners who actually care about that and are managing that. So useful. Other part of it is you've got the data estate insights. So we're getting more and more investment into the area of Purview, which is doing the reporting on data, doing the looking at how the data's actually changed, looking at the data assets you've scanned, the sensitivity, what have you got in there, and using it to drive actionable insights. So if we dig into that, do I have that open? I maybe don't. Let's dive into the data estates. So what we actually saw in here, so they're attacking certain questions. What does the CDO care about? Why do we care? We've got this new idea of health. We've got this idea of being able to be a data steward and go and have a look at what do I need to do? So some of the things we've seen already, like glossary, the classification, sensitivity labels, we can go and have a look at that stuff. But the idea now that we have KPIs, we have a scorecard, we can go and say, well, that's actually happening in my different things according to a set of rules I've set in terms of my data. This ties into a lot of the existing reports that we had inside of Purview, but it extends it and ties it a bit closer to people's roles, which makes it a little bit more integrated into how we actually work when we're doing this kind of stuff. Again, of the idea of putting data viz and analytics and stuff around our data so we can do analytics on our analytics and just generally make things better. Good. All right. Okay, and other people didn't actually read this one. Oh yes, no, this is really an interesting one. In terms of saying Purview can now classify PDFs. So it can scan a PDF and it can say, well, actually this PDF is this kind of data. It contains bank details. Oh, this is an invoice. You probably shouldn't put it directly in your lake and allow anyone to query it because it might have sensitive data in there. So allowing you to treat PDFs as data and scan them via Purview is pretty damn cool. So that is another thing that we have in there. All right, so that is the world of data. So interesting things in there. Again, intelligent data platform, super great from a leadership and Microsoft direction point of view. Doesn't actually release anything. It's nothing there. Probably the most important thing in there is Synapse Link for SQL databases, because it just opens up what we can do there and opens up some other conversations. Now, there is another conversation that we need to have way down in Power Platform land. There's various different things that have come in Power Platform and Power Automate. There's one, I just want to show really quickly. Do they have a picture of it in here? Oh, they don't. One of the things in the keynote that they did was showing how you can sketch out a Power App now. You can build a whiteboard and go, I'm going to do this form, this label, hit go, take a photo of it, and it will actually turn that into a Power App for you. I just love it. I don't see that many people actually using it in anger because you'll still have to then go and fix all the things. And if you try and do anything complicated, you're then doing all the Power App development in the back. But it's just really cool that you can just draw a picture and it turns into an app. But what we actually have to talk about is this thing. Data marts in Power BI. And this is quite a big change. And there's obviously a big fanfare, and there's probably a million different Power BI YouTube channels talking constantly about data marts now. I want to talk about what it actually means for the data platform, for the Azure data platform, the Microsoft Intelligence data platform, what it means for people who are currently building lakes and doing Synapse, all that kind of good stuff. So firstly, what is it? Essentially, it's a managed database for you inside of Power BI. I want to talk about what that kind of means. Let's skip over back into whiteboard land. So if I had my big old database, I don't know, 100 terabytes is a magic number of data that's sitting currently in a lake. And I want to get that into Power BI. And that's just not going to happen. What you end up building is lots of little data marts. Maybe 100 terabytes is probably, let's talk about 1 terabyte. 1 terabyte of data. I want to make that into Power BI. Now I'd end up building a load of Power BI, essentially models that are maybe direct query. So I need some kind of compute engine in the middle. Or I'd end up actually building, that didn't work. Or I'd end up building something that essentially I'm doing aggregations of composite tables. I've got kind of a very small amount of data I'm putting into my actual reports. So I have to do a load of model-y stuff here to keep it in memory, but my data's still held there. Now what this whole thing's now talking about is saying what we're going to do is inside Power BI, so inside and Power BI, we've got this managed data mart. And that can be up to 100 gig. So the general kind of sizes of models that you're expecting to see in Power BI tends to be a lot smaller than that. Saying, well, actually I can build something inside Power BI that can hold 100 gigs worth of data, and it treats it as a SQL Server. But I don't have to build the ETL. I don't have to write a load of code to say this is how you get from one step to the other. So essentially, I can say get data from a source. This is Synapse. This is my lake. This is where I'm getting data from. Bring these tables in. Bring in these objects. Write a bit of Power Query. And so do some data transformations. Do some various things, and it will automatically take care of moving data into that step. It'll then put a data model over the top of it for me. I can then use directly inside a Power BI report. So this thing, hey, look, we've got a much bigger, much more accessible, I guess, way of doing data. So it's kind of two different sides of things. It's meaning people on the Power BI side of things can deal with much bigger data volumes and actually land that and manage that and have that as a SQL Server. It's also an exposed SQL endpoint, so I can query it via Management Studio and use it as if it was a SQL Server. But I can do it without writing code. I can do it with just saying, tick these things, bring these things in, manage it for me, and go and work it all directly through the Power BI interface. So it comes up, there's like essentially a change to how we work. I mean, so we wouldn't be able to do it in this case where we've got our terabyte of data. You can't throw that into a data mart. It's too big. It wouldn't fit inside that 100 gig. Essentially, if in the old days, what we used to do quite a lot is say we'd have our data and then we'd spin it out into multiple different serving layers. Okay, well, here's all our different data marts, Kimball definition of data marts, and then we'd serve those out into their own Power BI models. We'd have essentially kind of this whole other area we'd have to go and manage. Now we're doing that less and less as we get able to query things like the lake directly, things through Synapse serverless, Databricks SQL, all that stuff tends to make querying the lake directly faster, better, without having to have that extra ETL step to go and land data somewhere. But it's still not as fast as it could be. It's still not the millisecond we necessarily want things to be when we're doing some real deep and dirty reporting. We're doing a lot of dashboards. We want users to be super happy and just clicking on things and it working instantly across billions of rows. And that's not always the case. So this is a move to try and make things closer to that. Try and say, well, actually, we don't need that anymore. That's no longer a separate thing. These things are now part of Power BI. We can actually have our models then managed in here, talking to each other. Lots of cross-querying. And that is an interesting idea, especially when we're talking about what we saw earlier of the ability for Synapse to then pull in various different things without ETL as well. Have kind of a managed super large lake, we're talking about terabytes of data, and we're doing engineering and automation, and we're making the same changes en masse to lots and lots of different things, and then allowing Power BI or business users to go and actually build out their own data marts from it. So it's an extra kind of massive rocket ship you can put in the hands of your business users, of your data analysts, who are actually then able to then build out some fairly big, chunky data marts based on some single systems. So the question of this bit in the middle. Like, do you need that? Could you get around that and go directly in there? Or is that going to be an absolute nightmare? And there's going to be a bit settling down about how people actually use it and how people govern it and what you can do with it. Certainly, from what I've seen of data marts so far, I mean, doing things that we'd normally do in a kind of Kimball-style data warehouse, managing foreign keys, managing slowly changing dimensions, actually doing the data modeling that makes a warehouse really powerful, can't really do most of that. You'd have to kind of be coming up with various patterns to do it. Most of the demos I've seen is actually we're saying, well, I'm going to build this new data mart inside Power BI. I'm going to put it on top of an existing data warehouse. So it's expecting to come from something that has been modeled and prepared and presented ready, but it's too big. And this is an extra stepping stone. Well, actually, let's take a subset of that data and put that as a mart. Take a subset and put that as a mart. And that seems to be where it's fitting into the big picture. But it's interesting and it's new, and I've not had a chance to dig in and have a look at exactly how it's working. That's the impression I get from all the demos and the YouTubes and the keynote and all that kind of stuff that's currently out there. So absolutely go and have a look at this. There's some other interesting bits in there. Certainly this is one of the most interesting parts. Get that. So kind of that visual data prep pipeline. And actually it's a lot like mapping data flows. It's a lot like this kind of visual idea of saying, take these sources, join them together with the join action, apply a filter, apply an aggregate, except it's using all the Power Query steps. It's a bit like wrangling data flows, but they put a better UI over the top of it. And so this whole data flow kind of going into a mart, actually super useful, really good for a low-code data preparation. My concern there is scaling. Trying to produce en masse, trying to do the same action to 1,000 tables. If you're talking about a big chunky enterprise who are trying to build out their massive data ecosystem, the low-code approaches don't really scale that well from automation. You can't do engineering, can't do that kind of stuff. Now, one of the big arguments is saying, well, this is more of a mesh approach. Actually, you know what? People don't need to be a data engineer and write a load of Spark and write a load of crazy ass code to build this stuff. We can get our business teams who are trying to build an analytics product, and they can build out the logic they're using they know, and they're not dealing with thousands of tables. We're talking about the 10, 15 tables that are in their domain. And that's interesting, but for me, it doesn't quite add up yet. So it's still very early to see if people are going to actually change how they think about this stuff. And honestly, whether the stuff that we have to do on mass and applying data quality and cleansing, and still where do we do slightly changing dimensions and all that kind of stuff, do they have to understand how that works? Does a business user understand how to build out those data model patterns in order to sufficiently build out that kind of thing? Don't know yet. So super, super interesting. Very, very powerful announcement. Massive, again, kind of big stake in the ground going, this is what you can now do via Power BI. Power BI Premium or Premium per user. Yeah, as to how it actually fits and how it's going to change and how it's going to disrupt the rest of the data landscape, don't know yet. But certainly lots of people are very excited about it. There's lots going on inside of it. So, that is all of the big things I wanted to talk about. So we're seeing some really interesting stuff. Certainly Synapse Link for SQL. Certainly more interesting things coming in terms of Power BI and Data Mart and what it can do. Lots and lots of interesting stuff. The big scary announcement is the Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform, but it's just a name, a wrapper that pulls all of these different data products together. Our operational databases, our SQL Server, our Cosmos DB, our analytical services, our Synapse, and our analytical services of Power BI, and the governance services of Purview into that one umbrella of going, it's just one platform, just one thing that's all the same and all works the same and you can do everything with it. Now, obviously we need to see that proven. We need to see actually these tools come together and work a little bit more cohesively. We need to see a combined roadmap that actually does talk about all these things together, rather than it just be a marketing term. A little label that goes on the top goes, yeah, it's what we're going to call it now, because we've seen marketing terms come and go. We've seen tools that get released and it's a scattering of different things under one umbrella, and then it just doesn't really work because the different things in the umbrella don't talk to each other. So if this is actually a signal in that direction, that the Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform is now a thing, a team, one coherent push, that is hugely challenging to the industry and is very, very great for us as data users, as data consumers, as data engineers, analysts, scientists, whatever you might be. But yeah, we just have to see how that actually all comes out. Cool. So as always, do not forget to like and subscribe. After all of that, go and read the book of news, have a look through and see what bits actually interest you. All of the keynotes, all of the things, hear it from the mouths of Microsoft themselves, and go and have a listen to that stuff. And let me know down in the comments what you actually make of this stuff. Do you think some of this hype is actually good products? Have you been using things like Data Mart yet? Where do you think it's going? Love to hear your opinions. Until then, I'll catch you next time. Cheers.